The Aurora Station's central plaza buzzed with excitement as beings from across the galaxy gathered for the annual Festival of First Contact. Holographic displays painted the vast domed ceiling with swirling nebulae, while the air shimmered with translation fields, ensuring every species could communicate freely. Elena Vasquez adjusted her diplomatic sash, the deep blue fabric marking her as Earth's cultural liaison, as she watched children of various species play together in the designated family zone. "Mama, look!" 7-year-old Tommy Chun called out, his voice bright with wonder as he chased a group of Altarian crystal butterflies that danced through the air, their wings catching the artificial sunlight in prismatic displays. Elena smiled, remembering why she'd chosen this assignment. After years of cold political negotiations, working on Aurora Station's cultural exchange program felt like coming home. Here, differences weren't obstacles to overcome, but gifts to celebrate. She was so absorbed in watching the children that she almost missed the elegant figure approaching from the security checkpoint. Officer Katha Silverwing moved with the fluid grace of her people, the aviaxes from the cloud cities of Nimbus Prime. Her iridescent feathers caught the light as she walked, shifting from deep sapphire to silver, depending on the angle. Unlike the harsh, predatory features Elena had read about in xenobiology texts, Katha possessed an otherworldly beauty that took Elena's breath away. Their eyes met across the plaza, and Elena felt something electric pass between them. Katha's large, intelligent eyes were the color of storm clouds, holding depths that spoke of wisdom beyond her apparent years. For a moment, the bustling festival faded away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of unexpected connection. The spell broke when Tommy's excited squeal echoed across the plaza. He'd cornered a particularly large crystal butterfly near the Aviax cultural display, his small hands reaching out to touch its glowing wings. What he couldn't see, in his childlike enthusiasm, was the delicate ceremonial arrangement behind him, a collection of sacred wind chimes that represented the songs of Keitha's ancestors. "Tommy, be careful," Elena called, but it was too late. The boy's foot caught in the supporting ribbon, and the entire display came crashing down. The melodic chimes scattered across the plaza floor, their harmonious voices now silenced. Several nearby aviaxes gasped in dismay, their feathers ruffling with distress. Elena rushed forward as Tommy sat up, more startled than hurt, but clearly upset by the accident. Tears began to well in his eyes as he looked at the broken display around him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his small voice barely audible above the crowd. "I didn't mean to double quotes Katha reached them first, her approach causing several humans to step back nervously. Elena's diplomatic training kicked in, preparing for the worst, but what happened next surprised everyone. The Aviax officer knelt gracefully beside Tommy, her movements fluid and unthreatening. Instead of the harsh reprimand Elena expected, Katha's voice carried the musical quality of her species, soft and melodious. "Little Starwalker," she said gently, using the Aviax term of endearment for children. "Accidents happen to all who dare to explore. The chimes understand this." Tommy looked up at her with wide eyes, his tears forgotten as he took in her magnificent appearance. "You're really pretty," he said with the innocent honesty of childhood. "Like the bird ladies in my storybooks, but nicer." A musical sound escaped Katha's throat, laughter, Elena realized with surprise. The officer's feathers shimmered with what Elena's cultural training identified as amusement and affection. "And you, little one, have the curiosity of a true explorer," Katha replied, gently helping Tommy to his feet. "But perhaps we should learn to look with our eyes before we reach with our hands." "I can help fix them," Tommy offered eagerly, gesturing to the scattered chimes. "My mom says I'm good at putting things back together." "That would honor the spirits of the wind," Katha agreed, and Elena watched in amazement as the Aviax officer began showing Tommy how to properly handle the delicate instruments. Elena approached cautiously, ready to intervene if necessary, but found herself drawn into the gentle interaction. "Officer." "Catha Silverwing," the aviax replied, looking up at Elena with those captivating storm cloud eyes. "And you are the Elena Vasquez I've heard so much about. Your reputation as a cultural bridge builder precedes you." Heat rose in Elena's cheeks. "You know who I am?" "Your work with the Centauri peace accords was remarkable," Catha said, her voice carrying genuine admiration. "I've studied your reports on interspecies emotional dynamics. Fascinating insights into the human capacity for empathy." As they worked together to restore the wind chime display, Elena found herself stealing glances at Catha. The officer's hands were incredibly graceful, her fingers delicate but strong as she handled the ceremonial pieces. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, as if she were performing a dance that had been choreographed by the wind itself. "These chimes," Elena said, desperate to keep the conversation going. "They are beautiful." "What do they represent?" Catha's feathers shimmered with what Elena was learning to recognize as pleasure. "Each tone represents a different aspect of our ancestors' songs. When the wind plays through them, it carries their voices to us across the void between stars. Like love letters from the past," Elena murmured, then blushed at her romantic interpretation. "Yes," Catha said softly, her eyes meeting Elena's again. "Exactly like that." Tommy, having successfully reattached several chimes under Catha's patient guidance, stepped back to admire their work. A gentle breeze from the station's environmental systems stirred the chimes, filling the air with their haunting melody. "It's beautiful," the boy breathed, and Elena found herself agreeing, though she wasn't entirely sure she was talking about the music. "Tommy." His mother's voice cut through the moment as she rushed over, clearly having just noticed her son's adventure. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay, Mom," Tommy replied excitedly. "I knocked over the pretty bird lady's music things, but she helped me fix them, and now they're singing again." Elena watched as Catha stood to address Tommy's mother, her movements graceful and non-threatening. The diplomatic protocols Elena had memorized said this should have been a formal incident requiring reports and possibly interspecies mediation. Instead, it had become something else entirely, a moment of genuine connection that transcended species barriers. "Your son has a gentle spirit," Catha told Tommy's mother. "He would be welcome among my people. We value those who take responsibility for their actions and seek to make amends." As the small crowd that had gathered began to disperse, Elena found herself reluctant to leave. There was something about Catha that drew her, something that went beyond mere diplomatic curiosity. "Perhaps," she said, surprising herself with her boldness, "you'd be interested in joining me for the cultural exchange dinner tonight? I'd love to learn more about aviax traditions." Catha's feathers rippled in what Elena hoped was pleasure. "I would be honored, Elena Vasquez. Though I should warn you, aviax dining customs can be quite different from human ones. Different is why I'm here." Elena replied with a smile that felt more genuine than any she'd worn in years. As they parted ways, Elena felt her heart flutter with an emotion she hadn't experienced in a long time. She'd come to Aurora Station to build bridges between cultures, but she hadn't expected to find someone who might build a bridge straight to her heart. Behind them, the restored wind chimes sang their ancient songs, as if the ancestors themselves were blessing this unexpected beginning. Marcus Rivera had always believed that the best stories came from the most unexpected places. As the Aurora Station's lead journalist for the Galactic News Network, he'd covered everything from trade disputes to diplomatic marriages, but nothing had prepared him for the buzz surrounding yesterday's festival incident. What should have been a minor cultural mishap had somehow become the talk of every cantina and coffee shop on the station. He pushed through the crowded marketplace, his recording device capturing the ambient sounds of dozens of species conducting their daily business. Vendors hawked exotic spices that changed color when exposed to different atmospheric pressures, while children from various worlds played games that defied 3 different sets of physics. It was chaos, but beautiful chaos, exactly the kind of environment Marcus thrived in. "Excuse me," he called to a passing Centauri trader whose tentacles were laden with shimmering fabric. "Did you witness the incident at the festival yesterday?" The trader's bioluminescent patches flickered with what Marcus recognized as amusement. "Incident? You mean the human child and the wing chimes?" "My friend, that was no incident. That was destiny weaving its threads." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, a shadow fell across his path. He looked up to see an imposing figure in the deep purple uniform of station security. Not just any security officer, but one of the mysterious shadowkin from the twilight world of Umbros. "Marcus Rivera," the figure said, their voice carrying the distinctive harmonic undertones of their species. "I am Investigator Zephyr Nightshade. I believe we need to talk." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, though whether from professional excitement or something else entirely, he couldn't say. The shadowkin were notoriously private, their faces hidden behind elegant masks that shifted like liquid mercury. Zephyr's mask bore intricate patterns that seemed to move in the peripheral vision, never quite the same when looked at directly. "Investigator," Marcus replied, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I wasn't aware the station was conducting an official investigation into yesterday's events." Zephyr studied the offered hand for a moment before grasping it with their own. Their touch was surprisingly warm, contradicting every stereotype Marcus had heard about the shadowkin being cold and emotionless. Through the thin material of their gloves, he could feel the unique bone structure of their fingers, longer and more delicate than human hands, but with a strength that spoke of their species' evolution in low-gravity environments. "There are questions," Zephyr said, not releasing Marcus's hand immediately. "Questions that require someone with your particular talents to help answer." "My talents?" Marcus laughed, finally pulling his hand free and trying to ignore the lingering warmth where they'd touched. "I'm just a journalist, Investigator. I write stories about the daily lives of station residents." "Exactly." Zephyr's mask shifted, and Marcus caught a glimpse of what might have been silver eyes beneath. "You see patterns where others see coincidence. You understand that every story has layers beneath its surface." They began walking together through the marketplace, an odd pair that drew curious glances from passers-by. Marcus found himself studying his companion's graceful movements, the way Zephyr seemed to glide rather than walk, their robes flowing like liquid shadow around their tall, lean frame. "So what questions are keeping station security awake at night?" Marcus asked, pulling out his recording device before thinking better of it and sliding it back into his pocket. Something told him this conversation was meant to stay off the record, at least for now. "Have you noticed?" Zephyr said, pausing by a fountain where bioluminescent fish swam in patterns that supposedly predicted the future. "How many species representatives have suddenly developed an interest in human-aviax relations?" Marcus frowned, his journalist instincts kicking in. "Now that you mention it, yes. I've had 3 different ambassadors ask me about Elena Vasquez's work in the past day alone. And the aviax cultural attach has been making rounds to every major diplomatic office." "Precisely." Zephyr's mask shimmered, and Marcus thought he caught the faintest hint of a smile. "What appears to be a simple cultural misunderstanding has triggered something much more complex. The question is, why?" They found themselves at a quiet cafe tucked between a Rigelian spice shop and a human bookstore. The proprietor, an elderly betazoid woman with knowing eyes, served them tea that changed flavor with each sip, apparently responding to the drinker's emotional state. Marcus's tasted like adventure and curiosity, with undertones of something he didn't want to examine too closely. "Tell me about Elena Vasquez," Zephyr said, settling gracefully into their chair. Even seated, they maintained an otherworldly elegance that Marcus found increasingly distracting. "Elena? She's brilliant," Marcus replied automatically, then caught himself. Professionally speaking, I mean. Her work on interspecies cultural dynamics is groundbreaking. She has this gift for seeing past surface differences to find common emotional ground. And personally, Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Why do you ask? Zephyr leaned forward slightly, their masked face tilting in a gesture that seemed almost flirtatious. Because according to my sources, she spent 3 hours last night dining with Officer Keitha Silverwing. That's quite unusual for what should have been a formal incident report. They had dinner. Marcus's tea suddenly tasted like surprise, with notes of something that might have been jealousy. That's actually really interesting from a diplomatic perspective. Is it? Zephyr's voice carried an undertone of amusement. Or is it interesting from a personal perspective? Marcus set down his cup, studying his mysterious companion. You're not really investigating an incident, are you? You're investigating something else entirely. Very good. Zephyr's mask shifted again, and this time Marcus was certain he saw silver eyes sparkle with appreciation. You really do see the patterns others miss. So what's really going on? Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, their gloved fingers tracing patterns on the table's surface. When they spoke, their voice was softer, more personal than the formal tone they'd used before. Have you ever wondered, Marcus Rivera, why some encounters seem to carry more weight than others? Why certain meetings feel like they were written in the stars themselves? Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Are we still talking about Elena and Ketha? Are we? Zephyr countered, and their masks shimmered with what Marcus was learning to interpret as their version of a smile. Before Marcus could respond, his communicator chimed with an urgent message. He glanced at it and felt his eyebrows rise. Well, this is interesting. I just got word that the AVX Council of Elders wants to meet with Elena tomorrow. Officially, it's about cultural exchange protocols, but ... But? Zephyr prompted, but the AVX don't usually get involved in minor diplomatic matters. This suggests they see something significant in yesterday's events, or in Hoth. Elena's response to them. Zephyr stood with that fluid grace Marcus was beginning to find mesmerizing. Then perhaps we should attend this meeting. Separately, of course. We wouldn't want anyone to think we were ... collaborating. The way they said the word sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. Of course not. Though I have to ask, why are you really interested in this case? Zephyr paused at the cafe entrance, their masked face turning back toward Marcus. Because sometimes, Marcus Rivera, the universe conspires to bring souls together across impossible distances. And when it does, even the most analytical among us must acknowledge that some forces are stronger than logic. The most analytical among us? Marcus repeated, but Zephyr was already gliding away into the crowd, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a cup of tea that now tasted distinctly like longing. As he made his way back to his office, Marcus found himself replaying every moment of their conversation. There had been something beneath Zephyr's professional demeanor, something warm and alive that contradicted everything he'd been told about the Shadowkin's emotional detachment. The way they'd looked at him, or seemed to look at him through that shifting mask, had felt like being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. His office was a comfortable chaos of half-finished articles, interview transcripts, and holographic displays showing news feeds from across the galaxy. But today, none of it held his attention. Instead, he found himself staring out his viewport at the stars, wondering what forces had brought him and Zephyr together, and what it might mean. His communicator chimed again, this time with a message that made his pulse race. Pem Rivera, if you're serious about understanding this story, meet me at Observatory Deck 7 at 2100 hours. Come alone. And Marcus? Bring questions, but be prepared for answers you weren't expecting. Z. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. Whatever was happening on Aurora Station, It was bigger than a simple cultural incident. And somehow, he was right in the middle of it, partnered with the most intriguing being he'd ever met. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. As evening approached, Marcus found himself changing clothes 3 times before settling on his best casual jacket. Professional enough for a work meeting, but nice enough for ... whatever this was turning into. He arrived at Observatory Deck 7 early, partly from nerves and partly because he wanted to see Zephyr arrive. The observation deck was nearly empty, just a few couples enjoying the view of the nebula that Aurora Station orbited. The swirling colors painted everything in soft pastels, creating an almost romantic atmosphere that made Marcus's heart race faster. When Zephyr appeared, gliding silently from the shadows near the entrance, Marcus felt his breath catch. In the soft light of the nebula, their robes seemed to absorb and reflect the cosmic colors, making them appear as though they were made of starlight itself. "You came," Zephyr said simply. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I hoped you would." The admission seemed to surprise them both, and Marcus saw Zephyr's mask shimmer with what might have been uncertainty. "Marcus, before we discuss the investigation further, there's something I need to tell you about why this case matters to me." Marcus stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability in Zephyr's voice. "I'm listening." And as the stars wheeled overhead and the nebula painted them both in shades of possibility, 2 very different souls began to discover that some investigations lead to more than just answers. They lead to connection. Ninia Okafor had mediated conflicts between beings who communicated through color changes, species that considered silence a form of violence, and politicians who thought lying was an art form. But as she stood outside Conference Room Alpha, reviewing the diplomatic nightmare that had somehow spawned from a child's accident with wind chimes, she wondered if she'd finally met her match. The emergency session had been called after 3. AVX Council ships had arrived unannounced at Aurora Station's perimeter. Not threatening, the traffic controllers insisted, but definitely not routine either. Combined with reports of unusual human diplomatic activity across several sectors, the Station Council had declared a formal mediation necessary. Ninia smoothed her burgundy counselor's robes and checked her reflection in the polished door. At 42, she'd earned her reputation as one of the galaxy's foremost interspecies relationship experts through patience, empathy, and an uncanny ability to see past surface conflicts to the emotional currents beneath. Today, she'd need every skill she possessed. The conference room doors slid open to reveal organized chaos. Representatives from 6 different species sat around the oval table, their various forms of agitation creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, color changes, and what sounded like muttered prayers in 3 different languages. At the head of the table sat her co-mediator, and Ninia felt her professional composure waver slightly. Talon Stormfeather was everything she'd heard and more. The AVX mediator commanded the room simply by existing in it, his magnificent wings folded behind his chair in a display of controlled power. His feathers were darker than Officer Kethis, more storm-cloud gray than silver, and they rippled with what Nina's cultural training identified as focused attention. But it was his eyes that caught her breath, intelligent amber that seemed to see directly through to her soul. "Counselor Okafor," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species, but with deeper undertones that made Nina's pulse quicken. "Your reputation precedes you. I am honored to work alongside such an accomplished mediator." "The honor is mine," Ninia replied, taking her seat across from him and trying to ignore the way his gaze seemed to follow her every movement. "Though I have to admit, this situation is unique in my experience." Indeed, Talon's beak curved in what she recognized as the AVX equivalent of a wry smile. When did a child's innocent curiosity become grounds for emergency diplomatic sessions? Before Nina could respond, Ambassador Krell of the Centauri delegation spoke up, his tentacles writhing with indignation. This is hardly about a child's curiosity. The implications of yesterday's incident have sent ripples throughout the diplomatic community. Human-aviax relations have always been ... complex. Complex how? Nina asked, slipping into her professional mode while remaining acutely aware of Talon's presence. Across the table, the humans have been expanding their cultural exchange programs aggressively, complained Chancellor Voss of the Regelian Trade Consortium. Their emotional approach to diplomacy is unsettling to those of us who prefer traditional protocols. Talon's feathers ruffled slightly, a sign of annoyance. Nina noted, perhaps because their emotional approach actually works? The peace accords Elena Vasquez negotiated on Centauri Beta have held for 3 years now, longer than any purely logical framework managed. The way he said Elena's name, with a note of respect and something else Nina couldn't quite identify, made her stomach flutter with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. That's precisely the problem. Ambassador Krell continued. This Vasquez woman has a gift for creating ... attachments. Personal connections that transcend proper diplomatic channels. It's dangerous? Dangerous? Nina found herself speaking more sharply than she'd intended. Or effective? Some of our most successful interspecies relationships have been built on personal connections rather than cold protocol. She caught Talon's amber eyes and saw approval there, along with something warmer that made her cheeks flush. The point, interrupted General Thorne of the Human Defense Coalition, is that we're seeing unprecedented cooperation between human and aviax personnel. Our intelligence suggests this goes far beyond normal diplomatic courtesy. Intelligence suggests? Talon's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several representatives shift nervously. General, are you implying surveillance of peaceful cultural exchanges? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Nina recognized the signs of an escalating conflict and quickly intervened. Perhaps we should focus on the actual issue at hand, she suggested smoothly. What specifically are the concerns about yesterday's incident? Chancellor Voss activated a holographic display showing communication traffic patterns. These are message frequencies between human and aviax populations over the past 48 hours. They've increased by 400%. And it's not official diplomatic traffic, it's personal communications. Nina studied the patterns, her trained eye picking out the subtle indicators of emotional rather than business communication. Longer message lengths, irregular timing patterns, the kind of back-and-forth rhythm that spoke of genuine conversation rather than formal exchanges. They're talking to each other, she said softly. Really talking, exactly. Krell's tentacles flailed dramatically. It's unprecedented. Humans and aviaxes don't form personal bonds. Their social structures are completely incompatible. According to whom? Talon asked, his voice dangerously quiet. According to centuries of diplomatic precedent, General Thorne replied. Aviaxes are solitary hunters by nature, while humans are pack animals. Oil and water. Nina watched Talon's feathers ripple with what she was learning to recognize as suppressed emotion. There was something personal in his reaction, something that went beyond diplomatic offense. With respect, General, she said carefully, that analysis assumes that evolutionary history is destiny. My research suggests that individual compatibility often transcends species behavioral patterns. Your research, Talon said, and Nina felt her heart skip at the way he looked at her. Is it based purely on theory, or do you have practical experience with interspecies connections? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications that made Nina's mouth go dry. Around the table, she could sense the other representatives watching this exchange with growing interest. I believe, she said, choosing her words carefully, that connection is possible between any two beings who approach each other with openness, respect, and genuine curiosity. Species barriers are often more psychological than biological. Fascinating, Talon murmured, and Nina felt as though they were the only two people in the room. And do you think such connections could be professionally advisable for those in diplomatic positions? Nina's pulse raced. I think, she said, that authenticity often creates stronger foundations than artificial distance. The moment stretched between them, electric with possibility, until Ambassador Krell's sharp cough broke the spell. If we could return to the matter at hand, Krell said pointedly, we still need to address the immediate diplomatic implications. The Aviax Council's arrival was unexpected, and several human diplomatic missions have requested emergency consultations. Nina forced herself back into professional mode, though she remained acutely aware of Talon's presence across the table. What are the specific concerns? Are we dealing with treaty violations? Cultural misunderstandings? Neither, said a new voice from the conference room entrance. Elena Vasquez entered with Officer Katha Silverwing beside her, both of them radiating a calm confidence that immediately shifted the room's dynamic. We're dealing with possibility. Nina watched in fascination as Elena and Katha took seats at the table. There was something in the way they moved together, a subtle synchronization that spoke of a connection deeper than professional courtesy. Their body language was that of two beings who had found something unexpected and precious in each other. Possibility? General Thorne's voice was skeptical. The possibility, Elena continued, that the barriers we've assumed exist between our species are more cultural assumptions than biological realities. Yesterday's incident with young Tommy and the wind chimes became a moment of genuine cultural exchange. Officer Silverwing and I discovered that our peoples have more in common than our diplomatic protocols suggest. Katha's feathers shimmered with what Nina recognized as contentment. The songs of our ancestors speak of a time when different peoples came together not for trade or treaties, but for understanding. Perhaps that time is returning. Nina felt Talon's gaze on her face as she processed this information. There was something revolutionary in what Elena and Katha were suggesting, not just about human-aviax relations, but about the nature of interspecies connection itself. And the council ships? She asked. Are here, said a melodious voice from the conference room's communication system, to witness what our ancestors have long prophesied. The holographic projector activated, revealing the stately figure of Elder Skyweaver, one of the most revered members of the Aviax Council. Her ancient feathers were pure white, and her eyes held the wisdom of centuries. Elder, Talon said, bowing his head respectfully, we are honored by your presence. The honor is ours, young Stormfeather, the Elder replied. Nina caught a note of affection in her voice. We have watched with great interest the developments on Aurora Station. What began as a simple accident has become something our seers have long anticipated, a confluence of hearts. Across the void of space, Nina felt her breath catch. Hearts? Love, Counselor Okafor, the Elder said gently, and Nina was startled to realize she was being addressed directly. The force that binds stars into galaxies and souls into partnerships that transcend species barriers. We have come to offer our blessing to those brave enough to follow their hearts beyond the boundaries of convention. The conference room fell silent as the implication sank in. Nina felt Talon's amber eyes on her face, and when she met his gaze, she saw her own wonder reflected there. Elder, General Thorne said carefully, are you suggesting that the Council supports romantic relationships between humans and aviaxes? I am suggesting, Elder Skyweaver replied with gentle humor, that love requires no one's permission to bloom. We can either nurture it or watch it wither from neglect. The AVX Council chooses to nurture. Nina watched as Elena reached for Katha's hand across the table, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that was both tender and defiant. The simple act seemed to give permission for something that had been building in the room all along. Counselor Okafor, Talon said quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. Might I speak with you privately after this session concludes? There are personal matters I'd like to discuss. Nina's heart hammered against her ribs. Personal matters? The kind that require authenticity rather than diplomatic distance, he said, echoing her earlier words back to her with a warmth that made her pulse race. Around the table, Nina noticed other connections beginning to surface. The way Marcus Rivera kept glancing toward the security station where Investigator Nightshade monitored the proceedings. The subtle body language of beings who had found something unexpected in the midst of what should have been a routine diplomatic crisis. It seems, she said softly, that Aurora Station has become a catalyst for more than just cultural exchange. Indeed, Elder Skyweaver agreed, her holographic form shimmering with what looked like satisfaction. The universe has a way of bringing together those who are meant to find each other. We need only be wise enough to recognize love when it appears, and brave enough to embrace it. As the formal session concluded and representatives began filing out, Nina found herself alone with Talon in the conference room. The amber lights had dimmed to evening settings, casting everything in warm, intimate hues. So, she said, her professional composure finally cracking to reveal the nervousness beneath, personal matters? Talon stood and moved around the table with that fluid grace she'd been admiring all afternoon. When he stopped in front of her chair, close enough that she could see the individual patterns of his feathers, she felt her breath catch. "Nina Okafor," he said, her name a melody in his musical voice. "I have spent my entire career believing that successful mediation required emotional distance. But watching you work today, seeing how your empathy and authenticity create bridges where cold logic fails, I find myself wondering if perhaps the heart has wisdom that the mind cannot access." She stood to face him, her pulse racing. "And what does your heart tell you?" His amber eyes held hers steadily. "That some connections are worth exploring, regardless of species barriers or professional protocols. That perhaps the universe brought us together for reasons beyond diplomatic necessity." Nina felt a smile spread across her face. "My research would support that hypothesis. Would it?" Talon's beak curved in what she now recognized as his version of a warm smile. "And would your research suggest any practical applications for testing such a hypothesis?" "Well," she said, stepping closer, "proper research requires extensive observation, careful documentation, and hands-on experimentation. I find myself very interested in your research methodology, Counselor Okafor." As Aurora Station spun through space around them, and two more hearts discovered each other, across the vast distances between worlds, Nina Okafor realized that sometimes the best mediations were the ones that created new connections rather than simply resolving old conflicts. And sometimes the most important negotiations were the ones you had with your own heart.